Hi, everybody. My name is Luke Graves. I'm a retired United States Air Force fighter pilot and a longtime old friend of Joe Burke. And I was greatly distressed to hear of his passing. It caught me completely by surprise. Um, I have known Joe for 58 years. And so I wanted to come to the ceremony that you're having for him, the memorial you're having for him right now. And I thought for a while that I could make it, but because of health and age, I'm 84, um, and the advice of my doctors, everybody says, don't do it, Luke, it's a bridge too far. So, being a fighter pilots have got to be flexible. You've always got to have a plan B. So this is plan B you're looking at. It's a video I thought I would send for everybody. And of course, if you're a fighter pilot, you're going to have plan B, C, and D. And maybe you better have plan X also. And plan X is when everything has gone to hell. And it's every man for himself, and you're running for your life. And I actually was in that situation one time. Okay. So anyway, I called a lot of the old friends, and it was very sad because about 7 guys that knew Joe, and they were all sick or lame or too old or whatever. One of our closest friends, Colonel Ray Tucker, his nickname is Friar Tuck, a very religious guy. Used to be our chaplain. We needed one in the old days, let me tell you. And he couldn't make it because his wife is pending heart operation in the Mayo Clinic. So I thought I would send a video and tell 3 stories about Joe today. And then in the end, I have something that was the gentleman I just mentioned. He wrote about fighter pilots. I'm going to read that, and that's going to be. Well, now let me set the scene. The year is 1961, and Joe and I are assigned to the 444th Fighter Interceptor Squadron, the Black Knights of Keflavik, in Keflavik, Iceland. Iceland is one of the most fascinating and interesting countries in the world. They have very high literacy rate, very cosmopolitan and very highly literate, intelligent people, and they have some of the most beautiful women in the world. And I kid you not, the old Viking that settled Iceland, Ingolfar Arnason, was in his big Viking ship, and he also had a bunch of slaves as rowers, and they were Irish, which always Joe has got a kick out of that because he was Irish, and he would talk to some girl and say, "Were you from an Irish slave?" Or something. But anyway, it's an absolutely fascinating place. It's totally volcanic, glaciers all over the place. But the Gulf Stream comes up and hits it, so it mitigates some of the cold temperatures in the wintertime. So although it snows a lot, it doesn't get down below 0. It's in the 20s or something like that. But it makes for icy runways and for low visibility and flying in fog. And there are no alternates up there. The nearest place to land, other than Reykjavik, which is just 30 miles away, which would have the same weather as Prestwick, Scotland, which is 839 miles away. I know that. I've flown that over the North Atlantic in a single engine. I know exactly how far that is. Okay. So anyway, here we are in Iceland, part of NATO, and the 444th was a really crazy fighter squadron, and we had a bunch of guys up there that were really crazy, and I didn't know what about it, but kind of insanity prevailed while we were there. And our main den of iniquity was our squadron lounge, or bar. It was called the Whifferdale Lounge. And so obviously I have to explain to you what a Whifferdale is. A Whifferdale is the maneuver that was invented and used by the Air Force Thunderbirds back in the old days when the fighters didn't have as much smash flying by. And so when they made their flyby, they'd have to gather and turn around and come back for the next pass. And so to stop having a big time delay, they did this maneuver. It's called, they named it, called a Whifferdale. And they come by, nose down right, hard up, kick rudders, light afterburners, make this hard turn, nose down, boom. It's like a crop duster turn. Boom, here they come again. So that's what a Whifferdale is. So naturally we named our bar the Whifferdale Lounge. And so what is a Whifferdale drink? I have to tell you that as well. Well, the Whifferdale is 2 ounces of gin and 1 drop of scotch in it, okay? And you don't really develop a taste for them, but after a couple of them, you don't care. So anyway, moving right along, there were 4 of us that kind of hung together there. 2 fronts, Joe and I as pilots, and then Pete Skinner, my backseater, and Pat Ham, both were navigators, radar observers, okay. And so, my first story that I'm going to tell you is a trip that we took from Iceland to Europe. We went to Oktoberfest. Okay, well, everyone remember now that this was 1961, and there wasn't any internet. And how do you find out if you're in Iceland where you want to go in Europe or whatever? And so the 4 of us had some leave, and we said, let's get together, and we're going to go somewhere. So obviously Greenland was out. We weren't going there. So we thought we'd head to Europe. And so I was looking around and I saw that Oktoberfest was going to be going on at a certain time, and also the Paris Auto Show. So I'm a real car guy, the other guys were kind of car guys. And we thought, yeah, we'll put that together and that'll be fun. So we had these old books, they were in German, about hotels in Germany. And I can get by in German. So I kept looking and trying to find a hotel in Munich, or München, as the Germans would say. And I found one that looked okay to me. So I said, all right, as I recall, I can't remember how I sent the deposit, but it was, by airmail or something. Anyway, I got the reservation in München for the 4 of us. And I wasn't really thinking, or I'd have gotten a reservation in Paris as well. But I forgot to do that. But anyway, away we go. So the 4 of us fly to Germany. First time I'd been there. And we took a taxi and went to the hotel. And when we got there, I was startled. It was a beautiful hotel. And actually, it was a 5-star. It was the highest rated hotel in München. Okay. And the guy came out, who was the doorman in his full uniform, clicking his heels. And so we went in and we had beautiful rooms. And so I looked at everybody and said, what is this costing us? I said, hey, the exchange rate's 4 to 1, so we were in a top class place and it wasn't costing us that much. So so we sat around and said, well, what are we going to do next? Well, we're all fighter pilots, right? So you're going to head for the bar. It's always cocktail time somewhere in the world game. And so we said, let's go to the bar. So we headed into the bar. Beautiful bar, gosh, in this place. And only one person sitting at the bar. And we walked in and stood there, and I looked over and I said, I think I know that guy from somewhere. This guy sitting over there at the bar. So we eased up to the bar, and here was this guy, very muscular guy, sitting there, and he had on a baby blue cashmere sweater, and that's all he was wearing. He's very muscular, looking, but he was shorter than I thought. And I recognized the movie star Charles Bronson. So we had walked up on Charles Bronson, and I know many of you have seen some of his movies like Death Wish and all those over the years. He was a Hollywood star for many years. But anyway, he's sitting in the bar by himself there. So he walked up and said, "Hi, I'm Luke, and this is Joe." And, the other guy said, then he goes, "Hey, man, you're Americans. Great." So then it kind of paused, and so we kind of looked around. So Joe says to Charles Bronson, says, "Well, are you going to buy us a drink?" Joe was good at stuff like that. He was very quick with it, as you know. And so he said, "Sure, man." And so we sat there and for several hours, had this wonderful conversation about, we were telling him fighter pilot stories, and lo and behold, he had been a gunner on B-29s in the Pacific, and he had 25 combat missions as a gunner in the Pacific during the World War II. And so he just loved us because we were Air Force people. And so, and he would tell us Hollywood stories about certain movie stars and stuff. They're hilarious. And then we tell them fighter pilot stories. And so I will never forget that. One of the most unique encounters I ever had. And Joe and I still talk about that when we saw each other. And so we stayed there for several days and did Oktoberfest, which is a little more middle or lower brow than most people think that it might be. It's kind of like the Indiana State Farm, only blown up about 10 times, where 1 million people a day go. And the main thing there are these beer tents by the great beer makers like Ludenbräu and Beck and Spaten, and you name it, each one will have a tent that'll hold 15,000 people with an Oompa band in the middle. And you get in there, and let me tell you, the Germans are very serious people, and when it comes time to have fun, they are very serious about having fun. And so they lock arms, come up, kite, hoo, hoo, drinking those mugs of beer. And so we spent a couple of days of that until we really got tired of it. And so moving right along, to get out of there, we were headed for Paris now. And so still remember this German train we got on. The German trains are always precisely on time. And you could sit there and watch the clocks, and with 40 seconds to go before takeoff time, they'd go beep on the, and then when it got 10 seconds to go, they go beep beep. And in 5 seconds to go, they start bringing up the engines going, and then it's exactly on the time. The train would go, would take off. And so we were a little bit hungover, and we're leaving and riding on the train and looking at the countryside, and it really became strange. We got in France because of all the war damage in France hadn't been rectified yet, or that sort of thing. And of course, then when they switched engines and had a French engine on there, then time changed. They weren't making their exact little points. And so we thought, hey, I could use a beer to kind of straighten out. So there was this guy selling beers, and so we bought a 6-pack. We said, "Is this good beer?" He says, "Ah, yeah, it's sehr good beer." Fine. So we start knocking down these beers, and I'm feeling better. But then I said, I'm just not getting anything out of this beer. So we got him back and said, "Was ist?" And he says, "Alcohol-frei." It was alcohol-free, no alcohol in the beer. So somehow or other, and the reason I bring that up, it just struck us as funny. Sometimes something will strike you as funny, and I think we laughed ourselves all the way to Paris. So we got to Paris, and we didn't have a place to stay, but we thought, oh yeah, we'll find one. So we had troubles. We went down to USO, and the guy says, well, every room in Paris is booked. It always is. But he found us a place, and so it was only one great big bed, so we had to lie on our backs like this next to one another while we were in Paris. I said, man, here we are in Paris living the high life, man. And it's great. It's a big come down from the other hotel we were in. And there are two things we really wanted to do. We went to the Paris Auto Show, which was one of the great international auto shows. Back then it was one of the greatest. And we spent the whole day there. And being a car buff, I was looking at the Ferraris. And I still remember the 1961 Ferraris and the model. I think it was a 275 TC or something like that. And they were $14,000 in those days, okay? Well, let me tell you, in relation to Volkswagen Beetle was $1,200. You can see the difference. And if you were to still have one of those Ferraris today, they're worth millions. But so that was very interesting. And then the final thing we did was, and the most interesting and charming thing we did was we went to the Champs-Élysées and we said, we're just going to sit there and watch the people go by. So we had this beautiful cafe. There's some really beautiful ones. For those of you who've been to Paris and been to the Champs-Élysées, you know what I'm talking about. We just sat there and had hors d'oeuvres and wine and watched the beautiful girls go by. And we spent, I think we got there at noon and we stayed there till dark. And then we went home and crashed. So anyway, that was our great trip. We got back to Iceland and everything was okay. And that's the end of my first story. Okay, everybody, here's story number 2. And this is a flying story. Again, we were flying the old F-89D. And it would do about 0.8 Mach, as fast as it would go at full afterburner, which is cruise for a Boeing 707. Okay, that's what you cruise at when you're flying in those days. And so I was leading this flight. Joe and I were flying, and I was in lead. And Pete Skinner was my back seat. I told him about my back seater. Tragically, he was killed in the Vietnam War. And then Joe, and I think Pat Ham was in his back seat. So we were doing high altitude intercepts, and we're up above Iceland, a clear, beautiful day. And for some reason, the mission was cut short, and I can't remember what. I think we went out there and did our deal, and everything was okay. And we're coming back, and I was looking down, and I was looking at Vatnajökull, which is the world's largest glacier. Think about that. There's some big glaciers in the world, but the biggest one sits on top of Iceland. It's basically a volcano underneath, and it is a monster. It goes from the center of Iceland all the way down to the coast. And so I thought, why don't we go look at that thing? So we kind of dropped down. I was kind of looking at it and thinking, God, this is really cool looking. And so I decided, rather than go fast, I thought we'll slow down and look at this thing, because there's, as we found, there's a level of supercooled air. You can imagine that mass of ice, how cold it would be on the top of it. So for about 200 feet, there's above it, there's supercooled air, and it's a cushion. You can actually feel it when you are flying in it. And so we slowed down, and then we put our flaps down. So we had, so we were doing about 180, 200, something like that. And it was like surfing on a 200-foot wave going 200 knots. Can you imagine that thrill? And the scenery was spectacular, with giant crevasses and waterfalls and just all this stuff. We were just a fighter pilot's dream. We were just going down that thing, and we just went on and on. A giant crevasse. We flew down this crevasse that must have been 1,000 feet deep, and it was just, we flew through the thing just looking at it. And then we came upon this waterfall, and this giant, it was kind of shooting out one side and heading over to another thing. And there's this great space underneath it. So I said to Pete, I said, you know, we could fly under that thing and you could get a spectacular shot, you know. Pete, a little quiet for a minute, he says, I'm not so sure we ought to do that, Luke. So I said, okay, Pete. And so I looked over, you know, Joe's on my way. I said, two, check out that waterfall. I said, you know, Joe, he'll fly under that thing. No, Joe. And so it was a little quiet, and then Joe comes up and says, après vous, monsieur, after you. So I guess he got to thinking like me, if something went wrong and we hit something and we had to punch out, we would have been, where would we have been? We would have been on top of the world's largest glacier. And, you know, only some daring mountain climbers could have ever got us out of there. Or helicopters couldn't have got up there. And so, had that happened, we'd have still been sitting there. You know what I mean? Frozen in place. So we kept on this splendid thing, and it kept on quite a while, all the way down the glacier, till we got to the sea. And big, long, beautiful beach there, but they're all black because it's all volcanic ash. And on the beach were hundreds and hundreds of seals, maybe 1,000 seals. And so I thought, hey, maybe we'll have a little fun with the seals. And so I dropped down, but you know, I'm an animal lover, and I don't want to mess them up and mess up their mating season or anything like that, or scare them. But I wanted to go down and look at them, and so we kind of buzzed by them, and they all looked up and went, and they all ran out in the ocean. And I thought, oh, maybe you scared them. But they all got out there, and then we're all looking up and doing this, doing their flippers. And I thought, what the hell? So I pulled back around, and we came down above them, and they all went, and they ran back up on the beach again. And they got sitting there, popping their flippers. And so it was a game to them. You know, it's like, who are these two creatures that dropped out of the sky to come play with us today? And so, I tell you, I'll never forget that flight as long as I ever live. The spectacular scenery, being with great friends who are all gone now, probably. And so on. And Joe never forgot that either. That's why, you know, we always look at mere mortals who never experienced that kind of stuff and say, hey, man, you know, and we think about it, they actually were paying us to do that, what we were doing. And so that was a really one of the most interesting, and I, as a veteran of 9 fighter squadrons and having flown 3,500 fighter hours, that was one of the coolest missions I ever flew in my whole life. Okay, gang, boys and girls, sports fans, this is my third and final story. And I'm remiss that I didn't say hi to the beautiful Betty. Betty, Adam sent me some pictures of you and his family, your beautiful kids and grandkids, and you're just as beautiful as ever. It was so good to see those pictures of you. And this last story is about Joe and me and how they met. So anyway, our tour is up in Iceland, and we lucked out and got the very best assignment that you could get for a fighter pilot in the Air Force, which was to come to the west coast of Hamilton Air Force Base, California. And it was right during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was really a much more scary time than most people ever realized. But I won't go into that. So anyway, coming back, I had ordered an XKE Jag, and Joe had decided, no, I'm going classy. So Joe decided to get a Mercedes sedan. He got this beautiful, beautiful black Mercedes sedan. And so we got those cars back. And after being back there for about a year, we're now in San Francisco Bay Area, which was, which is probably one of the most beautiful places to fly over. And after about a year, I got an apartment, and probably the coolest apartment a bachelor could ever have. It was in the Dolphin Apartments in Sausalito, California, overlooking the bay. And was it a cool place? I tell you. So I'd been there for a while, and I got wind of two new young ladies were coming in to move into the apartment. I said, oh yeah? So I saw them moving in, and so I said, hi, how you doing? It was Betty and another girl. And they were both nurses. And so I thought, aha, these are nice young ladies. And Joe, I thought of Joe. I said, maybe I'll fix Joe up. We'll take these girls out for a date. So anyway, I called Joe, and he said, okay. I mean, you vouch for them. They're good looking. Said, these are beautiful young ladies, Joe. So let's go for it. So he says, all right. So he shows up in his new Mercedes. And we go and meet the girls. And so we all hit it off nicely. And I didn't know where we were going. We were taking them to dinner or to a nice bar in Sausalito or something. And so we walked out they were dressed beautifully. We were wearing suits and things. And so we walked out to Joe's car. And as we were approaching the car, I realized that we had never made a connection with these girls, who is going to be with whom. And I thought, okay, this may be awkward when we get to the car. And as we got there, I looked over, and Joe was looking at Betty, and he was kind of looking at Betty like this. And then Betty was kind of looking at him like this. And I was sitting there looking at him, and Joe made the move. He says, Betty. And he opened the door, please sit with me. He put her up front with him in the Mercedes. And this other girl, Barbara, who was a very lovely girl, who I actually dated for a while, before I met my true love. And I got in the back seat, and that was it, gang. Okay. That was all over. I introduced, my claim to fame is I introduced Joe and Betty. Betty, I'm sure you'll remember that story, quite well. And you boys, the three of you boys, Adam and Jason and Greg, I believe, you each owe me a drink. Because if I hadn't introduced Joe to Betty, you would not exist. Okay. So wherever it may be, the way things are going, it may be the underworld, or it may be, in third dimension or somewhere else, but you guys are going to buy me a drink. So on that note, I've told my third story, and I want to finish up with something that a good friend of Joe's and mine wrote about fighter pilots. He's a fighter gator, retired full colonel, United States Air Force. Couldn't make it because his wife was sick. And he wrote this thing called The Fighter Pilot, which I'm going to read to you. The fighter pilot. Say what you will about him, arrogant, cocky, and a fun-loving fool to boot, he has earned his place in the sun. The spirit of attack born in brave hearts has turned the tide of epic battles and changed the course of history in this century. His deeds of valor and defense of freedom are unexcelled by the warriors of any era and shall forever remain the sacred heritage of the free, untrammeled people of this earth. But fame is short-lived, and the world remembers, and little the world remembers, almost forgotten, are the 1,200 fighter pilots who stood alone against the might of Hitler's Germany in the dark summer of 1940. In the eloquent words of Sir Winston Churchill, never in the field of human conflict have so many owed so much to so few, the few. Gone from the hard stands of Duxford are the Mustangs and the Thunderbolts that terrorized the Luftwaffe finest squadrons. Dimly remembered, the aces of the 4th Fighter Group who gave America some of their few proud moments in Korea. How fresh in recall are the thuds in the flak-filled skies over Route Pack 6 or the eagles of Desert Storm. So here's a nickel on the grass, my friend. for your courageous fighting spirit and sacrifice. Yours is a dying breed, and when you're gone, the world will be a lesser place. And there's a nickel here, there's a wings above and the nickel. And for those of you that don't know the significance of what we're talking about, it's an old song. Put a nickel on the grass, save a fat pilot's ass. And so on that note, Joe, my friend Joe, if you all would join me, I'd like to lift a glass. I love you, man.